Loneliness is one of those quiet visitors that comes to every doorstep. It does not discriminate between the young or the old, the successful or the struggling, the believer or the skeptic. In fact, some of the loneliest people you'll ever meet are the ones who appear surrounded by crowds. You can stand on a stage, receive applause from hundreds, and still feel as though no one truly knows you. You can scroll through countless connections online and still sense an ache of being unseen. That is the nature of loneliness. It hides in plain sight. I remember a season in my own life where the busyness of ministry kept me surrounded by people, yet at night, when the meetings ended and the doors closed, there was a silence so heavy it felt as if the walls were leaning in to listen. I learned then that loneliness is not always about the absence of people. It's about the absence of connection. You can sit in a family gathering and feel it. You can drive in rush hour traffic and feel it. And it can be disorienting because we often assume that if we are not physically alone, we shouldn't feel lonely. But loneliness at its core is a heart issue, a longing for someone to enter the depths of who we are and truly stay. Even Jesus knew loneliness. In the Garden of Gethsemane, as he wrestled with the weight of the cross, he asked his closest disciples to watch and pray with him. Yet when he returned, he found them asleep, not once but 3 times. And in his final hours on the cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" If the Son of God himself experienced the piercing pain of loneliness, then we should not be surprised when it visits us. But here is the truth. Loneliness is universal. It is part of what it means to be human. You and I are not weak for feeling it. We are simply revealing the deep need God placed in us for relationship. It is a reminder that we were not created to walk through life as isolated islands, but as souls designed for connection with others, and most of all with Him. In those moments when loneliness presses hardest, it is often then that God chooses to reveal Himself in the most personal ways. The silence that feels unbearable can actually become sacred, for it makes space for His whisper to be heard. We live in a world filled with constant noise, phones buzzing, televisions blaring, schedules demanding our every minute. Yet when those distractions are stripped away and we find ourselves face to face with solitude, we begin to notice that God is closer than we imagined. Loneliness, instead of being a punishment, can become an invitation, a sacred appointment with the One who never leaves us. I can recall times when the weight of solitude felt like too much to carry, when prayers seemed to echo back from the walls unanswered. But often it was in those quiet hours that God reminded me of His nearness, not with dramatic signs, but with a calm assurance in my spirit, a verse that came alive, or even a sunrise that broke through the night as if to say, I am still here. When people fall silent, God speaks through creation, through Scripture, through the stillness of His Spirit. His presence becomes more real in the absence of others. The psalmist captured this truth when he wrote, "Be still and know that I am God." Loneliness can drive us into that stillness where we finally see what has always been true, that God is not only with us, He is for us. He doesn't wait for us to be surrounded by companions to draw near. He is the friend who enters the empty room, the comforter who sits in the chair across from us when no one else does, the Father who whispers peace when the world seems silent. And once you discover His presence in your solitude, you begin to realize that what felt like the loneliest place has become holy ground. When we open the pages of Scripture, we find that some of God's greatest servants endured their most defining moments in seasons of loneliness. Joseph knew what it meant to be forgotten, betrayed by his brothers, thrown into a pit, and later left in a prison cell where it seemed no one remembered his name. Yet it was in that hidden place that God was preparing him to rise and lead a nation. What looked like abandonment was actually a training ground for destiny. David, the shepherd boy who became king, spent countless nights alone in the fields with only his sheep and the stars overhead. From the world's perspective, he was unseen, insignificant, isolated, but it was in those solitary fields that David learned to sing to God, to lean on His strength, and to craft the psalms that would comfort generations to come. His loneliness became a sanctuary where he discovered the heart of God. And then there is Paul, chained in Roman prisons, separated from the churches he longed to shepherd. Paul could have despaired. Instead, he wrote letters that still breathe encouragement into the church today. What man meant for confinement, God turned into a channel for his word to travel through the centuries. Paul's loneliness gave birth to some of the richest truths we hold in Scripture. These stories remind us that loneliness is not a sign of God's absence, but often the setting for his greatest work. The caves, the prisons, the deserts, the nights under the stars, all became places where his servants encountered him more deeply and were shaped for his purpose. When we look at their lives, we begin to see that loneliness does not disqualify us from being used by God. It may, in fact, be the very stage on which his glory is revealed. Loneliness, as painful as it may feel, doesn't have to remain a barren place. It can be transformed into a season of growth if we approach it with intentional steps. Sometimes we are tempted to numb the ache with distractions, more noise, more busyness, more fleeting connections, but these only deepen the emptiness. God calls us instead to lean into him and allow our solitude to become fruitful. One of the most practical ways we can do this is by turning loneliness into intimacy with him. Opening the Scriptures during a quiet evening, not just to read words on a page, but to hear the very voice of God speaking into our lives, shifts loneliness from a hollow silence to a holy dialogue. Another step is to reach outward, even when everything inside of us wants to retreat further inward. The temptation of loneliness is isolation, but healing often begins with connection. A simple phone call to a friend, a note of encouragement to someone else, or even a small act of kindness can open the door for God to use us in the lives of others. Often, in the very act of bringing comfort to another, we find our own hearts lifted. There is also value in learning to sit with the stillness rather than fear it. In the quiet, God has a way of revealing truths we overlook when life is loud. Some of the deepest reflections, the clearest guidance, and the most profound strength are born in the silence we once resented. If we can learn to embrace solitude as a gift rather than an enemy, we begin to see how God molds us through it, strengthening our faith, clarifying our purpose, and deepening our dependence on him. Loneliness then becomes more than a season to survive. It becomes a sacred classroom where the Spirit of God teaches us lessons that abundance and busyness could never provide. And those who emerge from such seasons often carry a strength, a compassion, and a resilience that shine like light in a dark world. At the heart of every lonely season lies a question we dare not say out loud: will I always feel this way? And it is in response to that cry that God gives us his unshakable promise: I will never leave you nor forsake you. Those words are not a fleeting comfort whispered to make us feel better in the moment. They are a covenant spoken by the God who cannot lie. When friends drift, when family disappoints, when circumstances strip away every support, that promise still holds. He is the companion who does not walk away, the father who does not abandon, the shepherd who never loses sight of his sheep. Sometimes his presence is felt like a rush of peace that settles our anxious thoughts. Other times it is simply the strength to get out of bed when grief weighs heavy, and sometimes it is the quiet assurance that even in the valley of the shadow, we do not walk it alone. The psalmist declared, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." That "with me" makes all the difference. It transforms fear into courage, sorrow into hope, and loneliness into fellowship with the Almighty. And it is not just for this life that we have his promise. Jesus himself told his disciples, "Surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age." There will never be a moment, not in this world or the next, when his presence will fail us. The God who stood by Joseph in the prison, who comforted David in the fields, who strengthened Paul in chains, is the same God who walks beside you now. Loneliness may come, but it cannot cancel his nearness. When we anchor our hearts in that promise, the winds of loneliness lose their power to uproot us. We may still feel the ache, but beneath it runs the deeper truth that we are held, surrounded, and known by the one who never leaves. And that truth, more than any earthly companionship, is where real comfort is found. My friends, if loneliness has been your companion, do not despise it. Do not let it convince you that you have been forgotten or cast aside. For in those quiet hours, the God who made the heavens bends low to be near you. The same God who met Elijah in a cave, who walked with David under the stars, who strengthened Paul in a prison cell, longs to meet you in the very place where you feel most alone. Asking arms of God are holding loneliness does not have the final word. It is not your identity, it is not your destiny, and it is not your forever. The final word belongs to the one who said, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." If that promise is true, and it is, then no valley is too deep, no night too dark, no silence too heavy for his presence to reach. So tonight, lift your eyes from the emptiness around you and fix them on the one who walks beside you. Let his word be your companion, his spirit be your comfort, and his promise be your anchor. And when you rise from this season, you will carry with you not just the memory of lonely times, but the testimony of a faithful God who met you there and turned your sorrow into strength. You are not alone. You have never been alone, and you never will be, for the Everlew even now.